My name is Jim Keogan, as some of you know me. Just in case you don't know me, my role and responsibility is I manage the planning and property development for my sins of Dublin City Council. But just as at the outset, just a point of clarification to Reinald, the actual minimum one-bed standard is 55 square metres. And I don't want to be disrespectful to our hosts, but I suppose we can get lost in statistics and the message is lost. And for some in the audience, 55 is a horror story, others it's not. And I suppose that's part of the discussion here this morning. But I'll try and keep my comments as short as possible, because I think the purpose of the exercise is to engage in a conversation and discussion afterwards. But just at the outset, to thank Paul and Motti for the invitation to present here this morning, and to congratulate them on the fantastic piece of work that they've carried out by way of the exhibition and the project and the publication, and it follows on from the work of redrawing Dublin. And it's great for us in the City Council to have somebody of with the creative mind that Paul has to work in the planning department, because you do need to kind of stand outside the box and look at things from a very different kind of perspective, and certainly Paul provides that, so well done. The themes today is delivering a world-class inner city for Dublin, and some people would say, "Well, hold on a second here. You're losing the running yourself here. You're talking way above your station, so to speak." And it is a big ask, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be making those kind of statements, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be setting those kind of objectives. As you all know, many of you here come from an urban background. There are many indicators used for benchmarking cities and city performance. You can have accessibility, the quality of transportation. You have quality of environment, public realm, air quality. You have also issues in relation to, say, amenities, public parks, the quality of playgrounds. And then you also have the whole issue of, say, personal safety, crime levels. These are all indicators determining, say, whether or not you are or not performing as a world-class city. And certainly Dublin has those challenges. And the one area that I want to speak about this morning is the issue of, say, housing and the quality of housing, which is also an indicator if you're to benchmark ourselves as regards a world-class city. A key component of housing would be population. And we're looking at the inner city. And despite all its problems, despite all its kind of challenges, one of the key successes, I believe, over the last 20 odd years has been the fact that the city's population has been rebuilt from its pre-war days to a situation now where it's more sustainable. It is the success story, I think, of the era of tax incentivisation. If we look and compare the city's population, over the 20-year period, 1991 to 2001, there was a 10% increase in the population of the city. That's a net population increase of 10%. That equates to, in absolute terms, about 50,000 population from a bench, from a position of, say, 498,000 or 478,000 in 1991 to just over 500,000 in the year 2011. But if you compare it to the actual inner city population, there has been a phenomenal growth and rebuilding of that population that was pre-war. It went from a base of 48,000 in 1991 to a current population estimated of being around 110,000. That's 130% growth. Now, you're saying the stats don't add up. Obviously, what we're doing is that, there's a net population growth of 10%, which means that the outer suburbs are still being impacted by the empty nesting effect. But if you look at the census profile then, you look at 1991, you ask yourself why, what was the significance there, because that's the threshold, that's the turning point. Previous to that, for the previous 50 years, there had been steady decline in the inner city in the population of Dublin City, and there was a hemorrhaging, complete collapse in the inner city population. The 1991 stat was the first indication in 50 years of growth, and it was stimulated, I think, and I believe, from the impact of tax incentivisation. This was the national system that was brought in by way of Department of Finance fiscal measures to assist in and stimulate urban renewal and address urban blight and decay in our urban cities. That particular scheme has been much criticised for a variety of reasons, but the legacy is that Dublin City today has a population which has given it vitality and vibrancy. And the challenge, I think, going forward for the City Council is to sustain that growth and consolidate that growth. To do that, you need houses, and you need housing accommodation, and you need residential accommodation. The Housing Agency, and John O'Connor's here today, recent publication indicates that we will need 7,500 units per annum in the Dublin region to meet pent-up demand and population growth. This is a daunting task when you compare it to the actual statistic, which was that Dublin City was completing just over 7,000 units in 2007, and the house completions in the year 2011 was around 500. So you can see there's an enormous task ahead of us. The collapse in the property market is well documented. I'm not going to go into that here. But just suffice to say, like that, the government strategy, Construction 2020, established a Dublin Housing Task Force consisting of the 4 Dublin authorities, the Department of Finance, the NTA, the Housing Agency, to look at tackling the impediments to housing construction in the Dublin area. The first report recently produced and submitted to the Department and the Taoiseach indicates that there is ready-to-go, economically viable planning permissions for in excess of a 3-year supply in the Dublin region. So you can hear, again, you have the stats, damn lies and statistics and the fear factors, but there are permissions out there, and the task of the Housing Task Force is to ensure delivery of those permissions. The current debates in relation to housing construction has gone into the whole area of standards, and in particular standards in Dublin, and whether or not they are or not an impediment to housing construction and meeting that housing need. There are many reasons that have been outlined to do with the fact that we have impediments to housing construction. They relate to the fact that, well, first of all, it's a national issue. It's not just particular to Dublin. We don't have a normal banking system in operation. There are difficulties and deficiencies in obtaining finance for people who build houses, and there's also difficulties in obtaining finance for people who want to buy a house. As well as that, a lot of the land that has the benefit of planning permissions and is suitable for development is compromised because of, say, the issue of receiverships and bad debts, etc. These are all factors, together with the actual building industry itself, which has collapsed and doesn't have currently the capacity to output that level of house construction. So these are wide and varied issues that are being addressed individually and collectively by different groups. A number of issues, a number of kind of comments have been made, particularly in relation to the standards pertaining in Dublin City and how they have adversely affected on housing construction. One of these is to do with, say, house size. In other words, the 55 square metre minimum floor area for a one-bedroom unit. There are other factors that have been thrown into the equation, including, say, design standards to do with dual orientation, the omission of single aspect units, the number of units that are to be served by way of a lift core, and the underground or requirement to provide parking as contributing factors to costs, which are an impediment then to construction. That's the debate. But if we just look at the issue of, say, size and the issue of, say, the minimum standard in Dublin City of 55 square metres, and I'll just focus on that for a moment, that particular standard arose from widespread criticism that existed. It was first introduced, we first amended the previous standard, which was 38 square metres, and we introduced the 45 square metres for the development plan back in 2007, and subsequently amended up in the last development plan to 55 square metres. And it arose from the fact that there was criticism of the fact that we were not delivering good quality residential environments based on the previous standards. And on foot of, say, a public consultation process, it was agreed to actually increase the level of one-bed sizes to 55 square metres. If we look at, say, the focus of the debate, which is on need for, say, reducing that standard or having a standard that is lower than that, you have to take into account, say, the particular conditions pertaining to Dublin. These are Dublin standards. These are national standards. There are national standards that are lower than that. But in the context of Dublin, 90% of housing output, both previous and in the future, is going to be of the order of apartment units, not houses. In other local authorities, the vast majority of housing output will be houses. But in Dublin, it's going to be apartments, and we have to have regard to the needs of the apartment dweller, which are very different to the needs of, say, the individual house owner or house dweller. That's one issue. We also have to look at, and it goes back to Paul's kind of work that he has done in relation to the Beyond Pebbledash, which is looking at the 2011 census. And it indicates to us that in the inner city of Dublin, and that's what we're talking about this morning, there is already in excess of 40% of the residential units one bed or less. And that's quite a significant kind of concentration of one bed. If you think of it, there are a number of district electoral divisions in the Dublin area that if you could aggregate them, you would have in excess of 60% of the units one bed. Now that's the equivalent population size of a middle-sized Irish town. Suggests therefore, as a capital city, which has objectives of being world class, that it would be acceptable to have that level of one bed as being the norm in providing residential accommodation. I just think it's not acceptable. And I wouldn't think it would be acceptable even to the middle-sized Irish town. But that's the realities that we're dealing with here. So we need to not ban the one-bed unit, but we need to diversify and we need to provide choice. And I think that's the challenge that we have going forward. That's not to say that we're doctrinaire in our approach. We're not in the planning department. Those who deal with us will know that we use our discretion. And there are opportunities there looking at those standards. They're not absolute, they're not cast in stone. And there is flexibility when it's required if the quality of the environment is going to be good. There's also, I think, challenges ahead of us insofar as that we're into a development plan review process. And there's always an opportunity to refine and reform and review, say, current standards. One of the challenges, I think, going forward is the whole issue of, say, vacant upper floor space in the built environment of the city. It's a lost resource. There's no doubt there's a huge potential for us as a local authority, as a planning authority, to look at how best you might utilise that upper floor space, particularly in relation to the issue of, say, unit sizes. And there's no doubt that provided that the quality of the residential environment is as good as, if not exceeds, the current standards, together with, say, non-compromising with fire, building regulations and access regulations, there is an opportunity to, I believe, bring back into use that vacant upper floor space. Paul would have worked on the South Georgian study, and Paul would be well aware of the challenges facing, say, George and Dublin, and there's people here who worked with Paul in preparing that study. It has advanced now where we have Gráinne Shaftry looking at typologies as regards how you might be able to adapt buildings back into use. But one of the challenges is that there's an opportunity also to bring back into use, residential use, these buildings on a per floor basis to provide high units or larger units. And this is all possible and it's capable of being incorporated into our development plan when we've carried out the study. But it is fair to say that while we are open to reviewing standards, it will not be at the expense of the quality of the environment. So in conclusion, I'd just like to thank Paul for the opportunity to speak in here this morning, and also to say that within the City Council, and there's people here from the City Council, I see Rose Kenny from the Central Area Office, who manages the Central Area Office and manages all that issue about kind of bed sits and housing quality and public realm improvements. And there's other people here from the City Council who have to face on a daily basis the challenges that are out there for the inner city. But the City Council is committed to delivering on its objective of ensuring that the city centre is a world-class city centre, but it is not prepared, though, to do it at the expense of the quality of people's life and living environments. Thank you.